Up here, and then Daddy met him at the door. And that's where Mama and Daddy sort of met for him to tell her, that Philip was dead.
Philip Gerald Turner was born to Davis and Geraldine Turner on July 25, 1947. He was the fifth of 10 kids and grew up in a farming community near the town of Jackson, Georgia. Life was challenging, and the entire family had to work together to make their small farm prosper. Despite the hardships, Philip loved to tease and play practical jokes on his siblings, finding ways to keep them entertained even while they worked.
We lived on a farm, and he was always pretending that he had gotten hurt in some of the machinery and stuff, just to get a laugh out of everybody. And it's just little things like that. He aggravated us, a lot, but he was always coming up with something.
He loved picking on people and telling horror stories to give you nightmares and things like that. He was the practical joker.
Miss Turner cherished all of her children, but it was Philip's mischievous nature that made her laugh. Deep inside, he held a special place in her heart.
Philip was always one of the favorites for her because my mom used to think stuff was funny. I mean, we got whippings for things, but it was funny too, especially the boys. The boys weren't bad, they were mischievous. The boys got away with a lot more than the girls did because she used to, think it was funny. So he was a kidder, a cut up, that type of thing. So she enjoyed him, I guess you could say, the stuff that he did.
Philip also had a gentle side. Over and over, he would ask his dad for money to purchase new pencils for school. After several times, his dad scolded him for being irresponsible, but reluctantly continued giving him the money. Years later, his sister, Cindy, learned the truth about his disappearing pencils.
I ran into a girl about 2 years ago, I guess, that had actually gone to school with Philip. Philip used to get in trouble for little petty things. And we always had plenty of food and clothing and roof over our head, but like school supplies, we were supposed to keep up with our school supplies. And my dad would, he would come home, I need a pencil for tomorrow. And what did you do with the pencil, you had, Philip? This is like the fourth one you've had this week. And when I ran into one of his classmates, she said that he would always, all the girls liked him at school, I think. And they would come to class, and one of them would forget their pencil every day. Well, Philip would break his pencil in half and give it to one of the girls. And so, it made me feel good, because I had a flashback when we were kids, how he never had a pencil, to go to school with.
During the summer, Mr. Turner did give his children some leisure time. One of Philip's favorite places to cool off was at High Falls Lake, only a few miles from his home. At the lake's end stood a sizable waterfall with a drop of around 10 feet. Philip and his oldest brother, James, affectionately known as Snooky, liked to walk across the small ledge along the top of the falls. Below the falls was a whirlpool that could suck a person under and hold them to the bottom. One day Philip slipped and tumbled down the falls and landed near the whirlpool.
But Philip and his older brother Snooky and two of my brothers talked me into taking them to High Falls State Park. I took them down there, and all of a sudden they disappeared. They got in the water and they disappeared. I could not find them, and I was terrified. And finally they came out. They had gone in caves under the falls and stayed there and played a while, and then they came out. But when they came out, I got them out and took them home.
And there was a pretty tall waterfall down there, and at the bottom of the waterfall there was a whirlpool that would sort of suck you under. And we was down there one day, Snooky and Philip, myself, and Philip was walking across the top of the falls where the water was running, and it slipped and fell and slid all the way down into down the falls and went in that pool down there where the suck hole was. And his brother Snooky scared him so bad, he run down the falls and never failed to go down and check on Philip to see if he was okay.
Like a river flowing, time carried away the carefree years of Philip's youth. and with the war expanding in Vietnam, he was drafted just shy of his 19th birthday. His parents were livid. His oldest brother, Snooky, had just started his tour in Vietnam, and the thought of having two sons serving at the same time was more than they could bear. However, deep down, Miss Turner had the greatest fear for Philip's well-being. Despite her profound concern for Snooky's safety, it was Philip's service that gave her the most anxiety.
When Snooky was serving, she never worried about Snooky because Snooky was mature. He had a good head on his shoulders, that kind of stuff. And he was a little bit older than Philip when he was drafted. I think he was like 22 or so, somewhere along in there. He was a little bit older, and she worried about him, but she knew that he had a good head on his shoulders. He wasn't going to do anything foolish, that type of thing. But she worried about Philip because she was so afraid that Philip's going to try to be a hero, that Philip was going to do something that was going to get him killed.
Like it or not, Philip left for basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia in August of 1966. The good news was, Fort Benning was less than 2 hours from his home, so he could easily come home when he had a weekend pass. During one of his visits, he surprised his youngest brother, David, known as Crockett, with a child's army uniform so he could dress like his two older brothers.
But I think that was when he was in Fort Benning, when he first, went in the service. But they would hitchhike part of the way home, or some of the families would bring them part of the way. Dad would go and pick them up, a certain spot. And you didn't have phones like you do now. So it was just, trying to work out a sequence where they could get him home. But he brought a couple different times he brought some of his friends home with him, and he went home with some of them sometimes.
Unfortunately, Philip's time at Fort Benning was short-lived, and in late October 1966, he was relocated to Fort Polk, Louisiana, famously referred to as Tigerland. Fort Polk played a significant role during the Vietnam War, training more infantrymen than any other base. The base's natural swampy terrain, accompanied by high humidity and monsoon-like rains, provided an ideal environment for preparing soldiers for the challenges of Vietnam. Philip anticipated completing his training at Fort Polk. However, military life is seldom predictable, and in March of 1967, he was unexpectedly transferred to Fort Hood, Texas.
Well, I never could understand why Philip was at Fort Polk so long and all of that. But then I found out that my brother James, Snooky, he was in Vietnam. So he had already been drafted. And so he was in Vietnam. So they were delaying sending Philip. And Snooky got out April 1967. April 1967 is when Philip went to Fort Hood.
In stark contrast to Fort Polk, Fort Hood presented a strikingly different environment. Where Fort Polk was characterized by its wet, flat, and swampy terrain, Fort Hood boasted dry, dusty hills with scrub brush that stood in complete opposition to most of the landscape in Vietnam. Philip found himself assigned to Alpha Company 1st of the 6th Infantry, 198th Light Infantry Brigade, affectionately known as the Gunfighters, under the spirited command of Captain Francis X. Brennan. Despite being predominantly composed of draftees, this unit was remarkably close-knit, a fact that was apparent to Captain Brennan right from the beginning. He meticulously assembled his team, handpicking experienced officers and non-commissioned officers, many of whom were preparing for their second tour of duty.
He somehow managed to keep our morale up better than any company over there. And what he did before we left is he rounded out his company with the best possible cadre he could find, and he went around Fort Hood locating people that he had heard about or that he had read about or whatever that had already been to Vietnam and was willing to go back. So he sent us back with platoon sergeants and some squad leaders that had experience in combat. And so I believe that we had one of the best managed and best commanded companies in Vietnam. And Captain Brennan named our company the Gunfighters before we ever left Fort Hood. And we actually earned a pretty good reputation in Vietnam.
We just clicked together. You know what I'm saying? we felt pretty special being a gunfighter. That was just something that I felt was a badge of honor.
It's just, I don't know, something about training all that time together, and then especially the combat in Vietnam that made us really, really close.
Throughout the following 5 months, Captain Brennan led his troops through grueling training regimens. Days were spent in the field, engaged in intense war games and tactical exercises. It was during the month of April that Philip was assigned to carry the M60 machine gun. While many others shied away from its burdensome weight and bulky nature, and recognizing it also made them a prime target for the enemy, Philip embraced the weapon wholeheartedly. Together with his assistant, Steve Madison, they formed an unstoppable duo, operating as a lethal machine gun crew within the ranks of the 3rd Platoon. The day they trained for finally arrived. They flew to San Francisco, California, boarded the USNS Upshur, and on October 4th, 1967, with nervous anticipation, set sail for Vietnam. The journey was incredibly unpleasant. Even before reaching the Golden Gate Bridge, many soldiers felt nauseous and vomited over the side of the ship. Over the course of the trip, more and more men fell victim to the sickness caused by the constant rocking, prompting the ship to be unofficially renamed Upchuck.
Pure hell to me. I was sick, vomiting over the side of that ship every day. Didn't eat nothing. I think it's the only time I ever actually lost weight.
Well, I'd never been on a boat before, and I was sick for about 3 days out. Now, my job was to clean the gangways of guys throwing up, and I was one of the guys throwing up.
After a grueling 22 days at sea, they finally reached the Da Nang harbor late in the afternoon. However, their misery was far from over. They were transferred onto an LST, where they spent the night as they sailed towards Chu Lai. Confined within the hold of the LST, they found themselves in an uncomfortable environment with a layer of water and rust coating the bottom. Adding to the absurdity of the situation, the following morning they were instructed to change into clean fatigues while standing in 2 inches of water and filth. Given their expectations of disembarking and immediately engaging the enemy, the request to change into clean uniforms seemed nonsensical to them. Little did they know that what awaited them would be far from what they had anticipated.
Where we came out of the inside of the LST, which was filled with rust and it was filthy. It was hot. We changed clothes to have our good fatigues on, and we thought we might get out fighting or at least shooting or, possibly be under attack. But when they opened the ramp, there was the U.S. Army band standing there on the dock. So we came out on a parade with the band playing. And what a surprise.
And we come up to the shores, and they opened up those ramps, and we got out. To our amazement, there's a huge band playing. One of the Army songs. We're all marching off with flags. I said, "Where's the war?" We all looked at each other. So this is hilarious, I said, this thing is going to be, I guess, a cakewalk for us. I guess we're not going to do nothing.
From Chu Lai, they moved to Duc Pho and were responsible for bridge security while receiving further in-country training. On November 1st, 1967, only 7 days after their arrival in Vietnam, the gunfighters experienced their first firefight. As darkness descended, the Viet Cong launched an attack on the bridge at 3rd Platoon's position. They swiftly engaged the enemy, and Philip moved from position to position, exposing himself to their incoming fire while unleashing a massive amount of lead from his M60. The Viet Cong were repelled, and the battle concluded almost as abruptly as it had begun. In recognition of his actions, Philip was awarded the Army Commendation Medal for Valor. However, the victory was tempered by the gunfighters' first casualty, as Philip's squad leader, Charles Kaler, was killed during the battle.
Bridge security, and we had our first little fight there on the bridges. They attacked us at night. One night they came through the water and started shooting at us, and that was the 7th night we were in Vietnam, and that night my squad leader got killed. And of course that put the fear in us. That's when we realized that we were truly in a war zone, and I think every one of us, without doubt, probably were thinking to themselves, I want to go home now. and it was a shock to lose one of our guys.
In the ensuing 3 months, they were transformed from green recruits to a seasoned fighting unit as they battled small units of Viet Cong. However, like other infantrymen who served in Vietnam, their ultimate adversary lay not with the NVA and Viet Cong, but rather in the unforgiving embrace of extreme elements: mosquitoes, leeches, elephant grass, monsoons, scorching heat, suffocating humidity, and sleep deprivation were their true enemy. These discomforts reached a crescendo on a particular day when 3rd Platoon was running patrols down a dry creek bed.
And Turner was a guy that he looked like a little powder puff, but he was tough as a nail, and he would hurt you if you messed with him. And I told him and Madison to shut up one time. They were squabbling, and it was hot, and we hadn't slept in a couple of nights, and we hadn't eaten all day, and the flies were so thick you couldn't keep them off of you, and there was no breeze blowing, and we were walking down this little dry creek bed, and they were just saying all kind of obscene things to each other, like, about 10-year-old kids do, and I turned around and I said, "Both of you shut up before I spank your butt." I said, "Like, you act like little kids." And Turner had a 50-round belt or a 100-round belt in his machine gun, and he just turned it on me and flipped it off of safety, and he said, "You shut up." And I said, "Okay, no problem, I can shut up."
On January 31st, 1968, the North Vietnamese Army, also known as NVA, initiated widespread attacks across South Vietnam, which later became known as the Tet Offensive. The gunfighters had already spent several weeks in the field when they finally returned to base camp on February 7th for a much-needed 3-day stand-down. As Philip began to unpack his gear, an unexpected order was issued. They were to gather fresh supplies and assemble at the helipad within the hour. Hastily repacking his belongings, Philip joined the rest of the troops that made their way to the helipad. In typical military fashion, it was hurry up and wait as they sat on the helipad waiting for the choppers to arrive. Philip's intense boredom was briefly diverted when a large grasshopper landed on his leg.
When you're sitting on the helipad waiting for the chopper to come in to pick you up, you get pretty bored. And I remember Turner was sitting there, Philip Turner. He was my machine gunner, and he had a green, one of those locust-type grasshoppers on his fatigues. And he said, "I'm going to give this thing 10 seconds to get off of my leg, or I'm going to eat him." And we all started counting down. So when he hit 0, he just picked him up and put him in his mouth and started crunching and munching. And then he opened his mouth and showed us all what a chewed-up grasshopper looked like, and it was pretty gross.
The Chinooks finally arrived, and the unit flew to the city of Da Nang.
It moved so fast, we didn't have any maps. We didn't know where we were going. We got on choppers with a basic load of ammunition. Basically flew up to this Marine Corps base with no knowledge of what we were going to do. When we got off the helicopters up there, I stayed with Captain Brennan close to him, and he was trying to get information from the Marines on where are your forces, where are we going to operate, what's the mission. The Marine Corps commander on the base really didn't know. He knew we were coming, and he didn't know how we were going to be used. They finally figured out that we needed to be a blocking force and make sure that nothing happened to the airfield, but we had to move out and put ourselves in position. So we marched from that camp up the railroad tracks, which paralleled Route 1, up towards Da Nang. And when we got to a little river right below Da Nang, we turned to the right and went out towards the ocean. Maybe, not even half a mile, and around the village of Lojang. And we camped that night. We got there about 2 o'clock in the morning.
On the morning of February 8th, after receiving sniper fire from the village, Captain Brennan decided to investigate the village. He positioned 2nd Platoon on his left, 3rd Platoon on his right, with his command group in the middle, while 1st Platoon followed in reserve. As they advanced across the 500 meters of open rice paddy toward the village, 3rd Platoon encountered hostile fire from a pagoda situated at the village's western edge. Philip swiftly responded, unleashing a barrage of M60 rounds into the pagoda until the gunfire ceased. The following day, when the company swept through the village, between 30 and 40 NVA were discovered dead in and around this pagoda. Unbeknownst to the company, a formidable force of approximately 600 to 1,000 North Vietnamese regulars lay in wait within the village. As the gunfighters approached within 100 meters of the village, the NVA unleashed a barrage of small arms fire, accompanied by the deafening roar of machine guns, mortars, and rockets. Then the NVA initiated a human wave assault, launching a coordinated attack from the front of both platoons and the left side of 2nd Platoon. The serene rice paddy was now a chaotic battlefield, with fierce hand-to-hand combat erupting in every direction.
Hand to hand, and whatever you used to fight with, we were doing it. A lot of the fighting in the earlier times, it was just returning fire in that general direction. You received fire from that tree line, you fired back. Very seldom where you saw them. Now, you're looking in this man's face. You're looking in his face, and he's looking at yours.
I just knew to myself we were all going to die. There wasn't any support coming in until, later. And so I do remember, I just told God, I said, God, if you'll get me out of this, I said, I'll do anything you want me to do. And I made that promise.
Once more, Philip fearlessly positioned himself amidst danger, providing covering fire that enabled his platoon to retreat, regroup, and launch a counterattack. The relentless battle raged on, lasting well into the late afternoon. Despite being outnumbered, the gunfighters valiantly fought back, eventually driving the enemy from the battlefield. But they also paid a heavy toll, losing 19 of their brothers and suffering 34 wounded. In recognition of their valor, the gunfighters were awarded the Valorous Unit Citation, honoring their actions in the face of adversity. April 30th, 1968, the NVA launched the second phase of the Tet Offensive. Philip and his fellow gunfighters were relocated to LZ Center, situated near the city of Tam Kỳ, which was a hotbed of enemy activity. As night fell on May 5th, while the gunfighters were guarding the perimeter of the base, the NVA initiated an assault, starting with a mortar attack across the base, then launching a direct assault on the perimeter defenses. The brunt of the attack was concentrated on the bunkers manned by the 3rd Platoon. Sensing movement in the concertina wire below the bunker, they responded by raining down 4 cases of grenades on the enemy coming up the hill. Philip joined the battle, unleashing a hail of M60 rounds upon the enemy, effectively repelling their assault. This initial encounter was a forewarning of the treacherous month that lay ahead for the gunfighters in what would be a deadly month of May. Adjacent to LZ Center loomed Hill 352 and the New Hawk Ridge. The NVA had strategically fortified the hilltop with a network of bunkers and 2 anti-aircraft guns, firmly establishing defensive positions. Previous attempts by various units to seize the hill had proven unsuccessful. On May 14th, the gunfighters received orders to eliminate the enemy presence and destroy their fortified positions. As the company commenced their ascent up the treacherous hill, the NVA launched a fierce assault from their well-fortified bunkers, effectively pinning down the advancing unit. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Sergeant Finis McCleary from 1st Platoon boldly rose to his feet and fearlessly sprinted across 60 meters of open ground.
And then all of a sudden this boot was right by my face, and it was Mac. And he was just a few feet from me. He said, let's go. And we just instantly got up. I mean, no thinking about it. I think back on this, I get very nervous about it because seconds ago, if I would have done it, I would have been killed. But it just happened. And then Mac goes over this way, and he starts firing up there, and all of a sudden, it looked like they turned their attention towards him. That key few seconds that gave us the opportunity to return fire, and we really shot it. We really threw a lot of ammo at him, and so we focused on Mac, and we start, and he goes from one hole to the next, and we're trying to keep the fire ahead of him. And by the time we got to the top, he had knocked off I think three machine guns.
Upon successfully capturing the initial bunker, he climbed atop and shouted to his men, "Follow me!" On that day, 3rd Platoon provided support as Philip and his fellow machine gunners unleashed a relentless barrage of fire to cover the main assault, which eventually destroyed the enemy stronghold. Sergeant Finis McCleary from Stevensville, Texas, was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions.
And he got up there and he started firing these guys, and he just said, "Come on, let's go." And I mean, that was it. I mean, we were getting up when he was going up there, but when he got up there and said, "Go," we started running up there then. I mean, everybody, I mean, they were passing me up. Everybody was running up there. So he really got everybody going.
Throughout the entirety of May, the gunfighters found themselves locked in a relentless battle against the NVA and Viet Cong forces. However, with a mere 3 months remaining in his tour, Philip's thoughts increasingly turned towards home and the new car he planned to purchase with the savings he was setting aside. Most of his friends were gone now, either killed or wounded, and the company was only a shell of its former self, but he felt luck was on his side. Having been in all the unit's significant engagements and having sustained only a minor flesh wound thus far, Philip found himself growing more confident each passing day that the odds were in his favor to be reunited with his family once again. May 24th dawned like any other morning in Vietnam, the stifling humidity nearing 100%, while the temperature had already soared into the mid-90s. Continuing their patrols between LZ Center and Tam Kỳ, the 3 platoons divided their paths, with 3rd Platoon veering toward the east, led by Philip walking point. Jerry Chitwood was acting squad leader, providing support to Philip as they navigated through the terrain. Close behind them trailed Robert Hayden and Russell McCalkey, with the remainder of the squad following closely in reserve. In the distance, off to their west, they could hear 1st Platoon engaged in a firefight which only heightened their awareness. With heightened vigilance, Philip led the way as the squad cautiously proceeded down a narrow trail, flanked by dense vegetation on both sides. After advancing approximately 50 meters along the trail, an unseen NVA unit suddenly unleashed a hail of gunfire upon the squad. In the initial burst of enemy fire, Philip Turner, Jerry Chitwood, Robert Hayden, and Russell McCalkey tragically lost their lives, while 3 others suffered wounds. The squad retaliated with a fierce exchange of gunfire, but the ever-elusive NVA swiftly vanished into the jungle, evading the gunfire from the platoon. It was a peaceful Sunday morning in Jackson, Georgia. The Turner family gathered around the table, visiting and enjoying their breakfast. From the table, they saw a car topping the hill that led down a long dirt road to their home. As the vehicle drew closer, they could see the military insignia on the driver's door, evoking a sense of dread as Mr. and Miss Turner looked at one another. Instructing his family to stay seated and a lump in his throat, Mr. Turner made his way to the front door, preparing to meet the officials. Following a brief conversation, he somberly returned to the table and delivered the news that Philip was missing in action.
We lived on a long dirt road, at the end of a long dirt road, and we saw an unmarked car, and we could tell it was the Army green. And we were having breakfast that morning. It was a Sunday morning, and the car, started coming down the long driveway, and you could just look at my mom's face, and she knew something was wrong. I think it was a corporal that came, and I do remember the chaplain was with him, and he was a Turner. And so they introduced themselves, and they told us that he was missing in action. They came every day and stayed all day long with us, the chaplain did. And he stayed there for the first 2 days.
And I do remember them saying, "Don't tell anybody, you can't talk about it," because they didn't know, the Army didn't know where he was. They didn't know if he was a prisoner of war. He was just reported as missing in action. So didn't really know anything, but I just know that it was very tense, very quiet, very tense around our house.
On Tuesday morning, the family went about their usual chores, anticipating the arrival of Chaplain Turner as he had done the 2 previous days. As the car slowly made its way down the long dirt road, Miss Turner busied herself in the kitchen, while Mr. Turner greeted the chaplain at the door. After a short conversation, he closed the door, entered the kitchen, and tenderly took his wife by the hand. Guiding her to the adjacent room, he broke the heartbreaking news: Philip would not be returning home alive.
Dear Mama, How's everybody doing? Okay? I'm doing pretty good. The weather here is raining all the time. I finally got a change of fatigues today after 23 days of wearing the same ones. It isn't too bad over here. At night, it gets pretty scary, but during the day, it's just about like being in the States. Just about, that is. I got a letter from Claudette and Robbie last week, and I got a letter from Jean yesterday. She sent me a picture of Patty. It looks just like her. I also got the letters with the picture of the kids, and got the letter with Sydney's picture on it. How was Thanksgiving there? We had turkey and dressing in the field yesterday. It was pretty good, too. It was the first hot meal we had had in 3 weeks. They had been stuffing us with sea rations, and I had really gotten tired of them. I guess it beat starving, though. The other night I was on guard, and a dog ran in front of my foxhole. It scared the daylight out of me. I shot him, and he started howling, but we had to go out there and shoot it again. Anything over here scares you at night. After you get used to it, it doesn't bother you too bad. Before I close, I have something more to say. If you do send some peanuts and pecans, how about putting some writing paper and envelopes in it? I can't hardly find any over here. We haven't been anywhere to buy any yet. I've got to close and get this in the mail, so write when you can, and see y'all in about 8 months and 20 days. P.S. The name of the place I am now is Tam Key, and it's 20 miles south of Da Nang. And P.S. Tell Crockett and the rest of the kids I said hello. Love, Philip.
Cemetery song. That's where you reside. In the meter phrases, those melody lines, and time you're not the healer that I thought all along, and the chord becomes the coffin in that cemetery song. Sang that cemetery song upon the mountainside, chorus with the river, a peace I hope to find. Darkness rolling in at the end of day. Rest where you belong, in that cemetery song. That cemetery